I wasn't looking for anything. That's the irony of it all. It started with a harmless scroll through my social media feed on a rainy Saturday night, the kind of evening when the world feels smaller and quieter than it really is. I had just finished a long week at work, and my only goal was to relax on the couch with a beer, mindlessly tapping through pictures of barbecues, vacation spots, and smiling faces of people pretending their lives were perfect. Then I saw it. A photo popped up from one of those mutual friends you don't think about often. It was taken at a cozy little coffee shop downtown, the kind that's known for its dim lighting and walls covered in artsy graffiti. I recognized the place immediately. My wife, Julia, had told me she hadn't been there in years. She said it didn't fit her vibe anymore, that the crowd had changed. That's why I never questioned her when she suggested other spots for our rare date nights. But there she was, unmistakable in the frame. Her familiar auburn hair fell over her shoulder, and she wore that green sweater she always called her lucky charm. She was sitting at a corner table, laughing like the world outside didn't exist. Her hand rested lightly on the arm of the man sitting next to her. I had to blink to make sure I wasn't imagining it. I zoomed in on the man, my thumb trembling slightly against the screen. His face was sharp and well-defined, his eyes locked on her, as if she was the only thing worth looking at. I knew that face. Not personally, but from old pictures she used to keep in a box buried in our closet. That was her ex-boyfriend, the one she had dated before me. The one she said was a closed chapter. I tried to remember the last time she had mentioned him. It must have been years ago when we first moved into this house, when she reassured me that their relationship had been young, impulsive, and doomed from the start. I believed her then. I had no reason not to. But now, that old ghost had stepped into my present, and I was suddenly the one who felt like a shadow, an unwanted figure lurking outside her real life. I didn't say anything right away. I sat there for a moment, staring at the photo as if doing so would change it, as if the laughter would fade, the hand on his arm would disappear, and the version of her I thought I knew would come back. But the photo stayed the same, mocking me with its casual intimacy. I didn't need to be a detective to know something was off. After a minute, I tossed my phone onto the coffee table, the screen facing down like it carried a curse I didn't want to see again. My mind raced through the possibilities. Had this been a one-time meeting? A chance encounter? Or had it been going on behind my back for months, maybe years? My instincts told me it wasn't innocent, but I needed proof. I stood up, the floor creaking under my weight as I paced around the living room. The sound of the rain tapping against the windows matched the thudding of my heartbeat. The anger didn't come all at once. It arrived in waves, each one stronger than the last. I wasn't sad. I didn't have time for that. I was angry. She wasn't home yet, which gave me time to think. Julia had gone out earlier, saying she needed to meet a friend for dinner. I didn't ask which friend, but now I wished I had. The thought of her sitting across from him at a candlelit table made my fists clench involuntarily. I checked the clock. She would be home soon, and I wasn't sure what I'd say when she walked through the door. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to sit quietly and let this fester like some open wound. I wasn't the type to bury my head in the sand or wait for the truth to reveal itself. I would pull it out of her, piece by piece if I had to. I grabbed the photo again, memorizing every detail as if it were evidence in a trial I was preparing for. Her laugh, his stare, the way her body leaned toward him as if it had never leaned toward me like that in years. When I finally heard the key turning in the lock, I exhaled slowly and stood by the window, watching her reflection in the glass as she entered the room. She looked surprised to see me standing there, but her smile remained intact. For now, this wasn't going to be a peaceful night. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wouldn't back down from one either. I had questions, and she'd better have answers. As the door closed behind her, I could feel the weight of everything about to unravel. Julia set her purse down on the kitchen counter and smiled in that casual, end-of-the-day way, like she had no idea the world was about to tilt sideways. "Hey," she said softly, the keys clinking as she tossed them into the bowl near the sink. I didn't respond. My eyes followed her as she walked to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter while she took a sip. She looked so calm, so untouched by guilt or suspicion, and for a moment, I felt like a fool. What if I was wrong? What if the photo didn't mean what I thought it did? But then her phone buzzed in her pocket, and instinct kicked in. I knew better than to let doubt weaken me. I'd seen enough to know something wasn't right. She noticed me staring and tilted her head, playful confusion on her face. "What's up? You're just standing there like you've seen a ghost." "I could say the same about you," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. She blinked, thrown off by my response. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for my phone, picked it up off the coffee table, and swiped the screen to the photo. I turned it around and held it up so she could see it from across the room. Her face changed instantly. The smile slipped, her body stiffened, and for a split second, I saw a panic flicker in her eyes. But it vanished just as quickly, replaced by something cold and calculated. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "Social media," I said, tossing the phone onto the table again. "It's funny how things come full circle when you least expect them." She crossed her arms and leaned back against the counter as if she were bracing herself for impact. "That's from a couple of weeks ago," she said, her tone shifting into something that sounded rehearsed. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I demanded, my voice rising. She hesitated just for a second, but I caught it. She wasn't expecting me to push this hard, this fast. "It's nothing," she said, shaking her head like I was being ridiculous. "I ran into him by accident. We hadn't seen each other in years, and we had coffee. That's all. Just coffee." I asked, stepping closer. "You expect me to believe that?" "It's the truth," she insisted, her voice a little louder now. "You're blowing this way, out of proportion." "Am I?" I shot back. "Because you told me you hadn't been to that place in years. Remember that? Or was that another lie?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. I could see the wheels turning in her head, searching for an angle that would make me back down. "I didn't think it was important," she said finally, her voice softening like she thought she could smooth this over with a gentle touch. "It was just one meeting. We talked about old times, caught up, and that's it. I didn't want to upset you, so I didn't mention it." I laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from anything funny. It was bitter, raw, and filled with disbelief. "You didn't want to upset me? That's convenient. You lied to me, Julia. Don't dress it up like you were trying to protect my feelings." Her face hardened. "I didn't lie. I just didn't think it mattered." "It matters now," I said, my voice low but firm. "And I'm not buying this innocent coffee date story. So, I'll ask you again, what's really going on?" She pushed past me, walking into the living room and sitting on the edge of the couch. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, and for the first time, she looked genuinely nervous. But I wasn't about to let that sway me. I knew how good she was at hiding things when she wanted to. "Nothing is going on," she said, her tone flat, almost bored. "You're making a big deal out of nothing, and it's exhausting. I'm tired, I just got home, and I really don't feel like arguing." I stared at her, the woman I'd built my life around, wondering how much of that life had been built on things I didn't know. My mind flashed back to every late-night text she claimed was from a coworker, every time she got home later than expected, and every excuse that didn't seem suspicious at the time. I wasn't the paranoid type, but now I wondered if I should have been. "You don't feel like arguing?" I repeated, shaking my head. "That's convenient too." She sighed, rubbing her temples like I was the problem. "You're seeing something that isn't there, and I don't know how to convince you otherwise." "You don't need to convince me," I said, leaning against the arm of the couch. "I'm going to find out the truth whether you like it or not." Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from being wrongly accused, but the kind that comes from knowing you've been caught and not knowing what's going to happen next. I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered every piece of it. The silence between us stretched longer than it should have. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her next move. I wasn't going to let her retreat behind vague words and tired sighs. Not this time. The air between us felt charged, like the room was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. "Fine," she finally said, leaning back against the couch cushions. Her fingers twisted together, knuckles whitening as she clasped them tight. "You want the truth? There is no truth. It's exactly what I told you. We met for coffee. That's it." I laughed again, that same bitter sound that scratched at the walls of my throat. You expect me to believe that after everything? You told me you hadn't seen him in years, that you weren't in contact. So what happened, Julia? Did you accidentally bump into him on the street and decide to relive the good old days over coffee? Her lips parted, but no words came out. That hesitation told me more than any denial could. There was a gap in her story, something she couldn't smooth over, and we both knew it. You didn't accidentally meet him, did you? I pressed. She looked away, her gaze flickering to the window like she was searching for an escape route. I didn't plan it, she whispered. He reached out to me first, messaged me on social media a few months ago. I didn't think it was a big deal. We just talked. A few months ago. My stomach twisted at the timeline. While I was busy planning weekend getaways and surprise dinners to keep our marriage alive, she was rekindling conversations with the man who used to have her heart. And you didn't think to mention that to me? My voice was steady, but inside, I could feel the anger clawing its way up my throat. She exhaled sharply, like she was tired of defending herself. I didn't think it mattered. It was harmless. Harmless, I repeated, tasting the word as if it were poison. You're telling me that keeping secrets, meeting up behind my back, and lying about where you've been is harmless? She stood up, crossing the room to stand near the fireplace, her back to me. The soft glow of the table lamp highlighted the tension in her shoulders. I didn't lie, she said quietly. I just didn't tell you everything. I stepped closer, the space between us shrinking, but the emotional distance growing wider. That's the same thing, Julia. You think because you didn't explicitly say the words, it makes it any less of a betrayal. She spun around, and for the first time that night, there was fire in her eyes. I'm not cheating on you, she snapped. Is that what you want to hear? That I'm sneaking around, having some torrid affair? Well, I'm not. I made a mistake by meeting him, but it doesn't mean what you think it does. I didn't believe her. I couldn't. Why am I asked, my voice softer now, but no less demanding. Out of all the people you could reconnect with, why the ex you supposedly left in the past? She hesitated again, and I could almost see her struggling to form the right answer. But there was no right answer that would fix this. Because it was easy, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. We had history. He understood parts of me that I didn't think anyone else could. But that doesn't mean I wanted him back. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't sure which part hurt more. The fact that she'd sought comfort in someone else, or the fact that she'd kept it hidden from me until now. I took a step back, running a hand through my hair as I tried to process everything. Does he want you back? She flinched, like the question had struck a nerve. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe, but I told him it wasn't going to happen. I'm married, and I love you. I made that clear. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. The absurdity of the situation gnawed at me. She loved me, but she had no problem meeting her ex for coffee in secret and keeping it under wraps for months. Love wasn't supposed to feel this hollow. You didn't love me enough to be honest, I said, my tone cold. That's what this really comes down to, isn't it? She opened her mouth to respond, but her phone buzzed again, cutting through the silence like a blade. Her eyes darted to it instinctively, and that was all the confirmation I needed. Who is it? I asked, already knowing the answer. It's no one, she said quickly, too quickly. I reached for the phone before she could, snatching it from the end table and flipping it over. His name lit up the screen like a neon sign, flashing guilt straight into my face. I didn't unlock it. I didn't need to. The fact that he was texting her at this hour told me everything I needed to know. I tossed the phone onto the couch, the sound of it hitting the cushions filling the room like a gunshot. Still think it's harmless? Her breath hitched, and I could see the cracks in her composure starting to spread. Please don't do this, she whispered. Don't turn this into something it's not. It already is, I said, my voice low but deadly. And I'm not stopping until I know exactly how far this went. The fear returned to her eyes, and for the first time that night, I saw real vulnerability. But I wasn't ready to feel sorry for her. Not yet. There were too many unanswered questions, and I wasn't leaving any stone unturned. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Julia had gone to bed hours earlier, retreating to the comfort of our bedroom like she could shut out the world and reset everything in the morning. I stayed downstairs, pacing the living room while fragments of our conversation looped in my head. Her denials, her vague explanations, the way her voice trembled when she said, "Please don't do this." The truth was right there, hanging in the air, just out of reach. I wasn't about to give up now. By the time the clock hit 3 a.m., I had made up my mind. I needed more than her half-baked answers. I needed proof, something undeniable that would force her to admit everything. If she thought she could sweep this under the rug, she was wrong. Her phone was still on the couch where I had thrown it earlier. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether this was the right move. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who snooped and invaded privacy. But wasn't that line already crossed the moment she lied to my face? I picked it up, my fingers gripping the edges as if it might burn me. The screen was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. I wasn't proud of how quickly I entered it. Once I was in, I went straight to the messages. His name sat right at the top of the list, as expected. My thumb hovered over it for a second before I tapped it. The conversation opened like Pandora's box, and what I saw inside made my blood run cold. It wasn't just one or two texts. It was an entire thread stretching back weeks, maybe months. Messages about meeting up for coffee. Casual jokes about things they used to do together. Nostalgic references to their past that made me feel like an outsider looking in on a life I was never a part of. And then there were the messages that cut deeper, the ones that hinted at more than just friendly conversations. "I miss talking to you like this. Today reminded me of how easy things used to be. Can't wait to see you again." I scrolled further, my heart pounding like a drum. There were photos too, nothing explicit but intimate in their own way. Pictures of the coffee shop, the view from some park bench I didn't recognize, and one of her smiling at the camera, her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in years. I clenched the phone so tightly that my knuckles ached. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted all at once, flooding my veins like lava. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't harmless. I needed to confront her, right now, but I wasn't stupid. I knew she'd twist things again, try to downplay the messages as just words. She was good at that, turning black and white into shades of gray. But this time, I wasn't giving her the chance. I took screenshots of everything, sent them to my own phone, and deleted the evidence from hers. If she thought I didn't have proof, she'd feel safer admitting more. By the time I crept upstairs, the house was deathly quiet. Julia was asleep, her breathing steady, her face peaceful in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. For a moment, I stood there, watching her like she was a stranger. How had we ended up here? Just a few weeks ago, I would have sworn she was happy. We weren't perfect, but no marriage was. I thought we were working through things together. But now, standing in the doorway, I realized I had been living in a version of reality she had carefully curated for me. I sat down on the edge of the bed, careful not to wake her, and stared at the ceiling. The weight of everything pressed down on me, suffocating and relentless. I knew that when morning came, there would be no going back. I wasn't sure how long I sat there before I finally drifted off into a restless sleep, but when I woke up, the sunlight was streaming through the curtains, and the sound of birds chirping outside felt cruelly out of place. Julia was already up. I heard the faint clinking of dishes downstairs, the sound of her humming softly as if today was just another day. I grabbed my phone, opened the screenshots, and stared at them one last time. This was it. I found her in the kitchen, making breakfast like she didn't have a care in the world. She glanced up when I walked in, her smile easy and warm. "Morning," she said, flipping a pancake onto a plate. I didn't answer. I placed my phone on the table between us and tapped the screen to show her the first screenshot. Her smile faltered instantly. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You tell me," I replied, folding my arms across my chest. "Go ahead. Read them." She didn't need to. I could see it in her eyes, the recognition, the fear, and the realization that her web of half-truths had finally unraveled. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the phone, but I snatched it away before she could touch it. "Don't bother trying to delete anything," I said coldly. "I've got everything saved." She took a step back, her back hitting the edge of the counter. "I can explain," she said, her voice cracking. Of course you can, I said, sarcasm dripping from every word. You always have an explanation, don't you? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. This wasn't the time for sympathy. I needed answers, and I wasn't stopping until I had them all. Let's start with the truth, Julia, I said, leaning in just enough to make sure she couldn't avoid me. And don't you dare tell me this was just coffee. Her lips quivered, but no words came out. For once, she didn't have a script prepared. I could feel the cracks widening, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the floodgates opened. Her breath hitched as she stared at the phone in my hand, as if it were a weapon she couldn't defend herself against. I leaned back, giving her space. Not because she deserved it, but because I wanted to watch how far she'd squirm before the truth spilled out. She wiped her eyes quickly, as if erasing the tears would make me forget they'd ever appeared. But I wasn't in the mood to be distracted by theatrics. I knew the difference between regret and performance, and right now Julia was working on the latter. I didn't cheat on you, she blurted out suddenly, as if saying it first would make it true. It wasn't like that. I swear. I raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Then what was it? Because these messages don't exactly scream friendly reunion. I tapped the screen, scrolling through the text she clearly wished I hadn't seen. Did you miss him, Julia? Is that what this was about? Reliving the glory days with the man who knew you before me. She bit her lip, her gaze darting around the kitchen like she was looking for a way out. It wasn't about him, she whispered. It was about me. I almost laughed. You're seriously going to make this about self-discovery? Is that the excuse you're using now? Her face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. You don't understand. Things between us haven't been right. You've felt it too, haven't you? The distance, the routine, the way we barely talk anymore. I didn't seek him out because I wanted him. I needed someone to remind me of who I used to be, and that someone just happened to be your ex? I shot back, my voice rising. Do you know how pathetic that sounds? Instead of talking to me, you ran to the guy who had a front row seat to your past mistakes. It wasn't like that, she said again, shaking her head furiously. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just wanted to feel something, anything that wasn't this numbness I've been drowning in. The admission hit me like a slap. As much as I hated to admit it, there was a sliver of truth in her words. We had been drifting. I noticed it, but I thought we could fix it. I didn't realize she'd been searching for her fix outside of our marriage. I stepped closer, placing the phone back on the table with more force than necessary. So, what happened after the coffee dates, Julia? Don't lie to me. I'm done with lies. Her mouth opened, then closed, like she was trying to piece together the least damaging version of the truth. We didn't sleep together, she said finally. I swear on everything. I wouldn't do that to you. Then why didn't you tell me about him? I asked, my voice cold and cutting. If it was so innocent, why hide it? Her shoulders sagged, like the weight of her own deception had finally caught up to her. Because I knew you wouldn't understand. I knew you'd see it as a betrayal, even if it wasn't. Because it is a betrayal, I snapped. You don't get to redefine what betrayal means just because you didn't get caught in bed with him. You lied. You hid things. You built an entire secret relationship behind my back, and you expect me to be okay with that? Her tears fell freely now, but I didn't move to comfort her. She wasn't the victim here, no matter how much she wanted to be. You have to believe me, she whispered, her voice cracking. I made a mistake, but it didn't go as far as you think. I stopped it before it could. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, staring at her like she was a puzzle I couldn't solve. Why now? I asked. Why stop it now, after all this time? She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. You didn't stop it, I said, my tone as sharp as a knife. You got caught. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Instead, she broke down, burying her face in her hands like that would make me disappear. I waited a moment, letting the weight of my accusations settle between us. How far did it really go, Julia? Don't give me the cleaned-up version. I want the truth. She lowered her hands slowly, her eyes swollen and red. We kissed, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Once. That's all. I swear. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I fought the urge to explode. When? Last week, she whispered. The timeline hit me like a punch to the gut. Last week, when she told me she had a late meeting. Last week, when I'd been home alone, cooking dinner, and wondering when she'd be back. I took a step back, needing the distance to think clearly. Did you plan it? No, she said quickly. It wasn't planned. We met for coffee, and it just happened. I ended it after that. I told him we couldn't keep doing this. Convenient, I muttered under my breath. It's the truth, she pleaded. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I didn't sleep with him. I didn't let it go that far. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. And I'm supposed to find comfort in that? Her silence answered my question. I turned away, running my hands through my hair as the weight of her confession settled over me. A part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the idea that this could be salvaged. But the other part, the angry, betrayed part, knew better. I need some air, I said, grabbing my jacket from the chair. Please don't go, she whispered, her voice broken. We can fix this. I can fix this. I didn't look back as I opened the door and stepped outside. The cool morning air hit my face, but it didn't cool the fire burning inside me. I wasn't sure if this could be fixed, and right now, I didn't want to know. I needed time to process everything, to decide what the next move would be. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, the early morning still quiet, the streets empty except for a few joggers and the occasional dog walker. The world seemed so normal, as if it hadn't shifted under my feet just hours ago. My breath came out in white puffs as I tried to clear my head, but every time I blinked, I saw her face, the panic, the tears, the cracks in her lies. She had admitted to the kiss, but I knew there was more. People don't admit everything in one sitting. They drip-feed the truth in doses they think you can handle. I'd gotten the first dose back in the kitchen, but I wasn't naive enough to think that was all of it. The problem with betrayals like this is that they eat away at everything you thought you knew. Every memory becomes suspect. Every moment gets re-examined. Had I missed the signs? How long had I been living next to a stranger pretending to be my wife? I found myself at the small park where we used to take evening walks during the early years of our marriage. The bench where we'd once sat, laughing and dreaming about the future, now felt like a monument to something that had quietly died. I sat down, pulling out my phone to look at the screenshots again. I scrolled slowly, reading each message carefully, trying to piece together the timeline. Most of the texts were flirtatious but not overtly damning, until I hit one that stopped me cold. Last week felt like old times. I can't stop thinking about it. I'll wait for your decision. It was from him, and it was sent the night of the supposed kiss. I read it over and over, the words burrowing into my brain like splinters. I'll wait for your decision. What decision? Julia had said she ended it after the kiss, but this message suggested otherwise. If she had truly ended things, why was he waiting for her to decide something? A new wave of anger surged through me. She wasn't done with him, not when he thought she had a choice to make. She had lied again. I stood up, stuffing my phone back into my pocket as I headed home. The brisk walk did little to calm me, but at least it sharpened my focus. If she thought she could outmaneuver me with half-truths, she was about to learn otherwise. When I walked through the front door, she was still in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee cradled between her hands. She looked up as I entered, her eyes swollen and glassy. You didn't leave, she said softly, like she hadn't expected me to come back. I ignored the attempt at vulnerability and pulled out my phone, placing it on the table between us. I tapped the screen to bring up the message. Explain this, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. Her eyes flicked to the message, and I saw the way her breath hitched. She tried to compose herself, but it was too late. I caught her off guard. It's not what you think, she said, her voice shaking. Stop saying that, I snapped. You said that so many times I could tattoo it on my arm by now. What decision was he waiting for? She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. He wanted me to leave you, she admitted, her words tumbling out like they were burning her throat. He said if I wasn't happy, we could start over. But I told him no. I told him I wasn't leaving you. The room felt like it had shrunk, the walls pressing in on me. So, he thought you needed time to decide? Yes, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't need time. I told him that night it wasn't going to happen. I swear. I leaned against the table, palms flat against the surface as I tried to steady myself. If you were so sure, why didn't you block him? Why did you let him keep texting you? I don't know, she sobbed, her shoulders shaking. I was scared. I didn't want to make things worse. I thought if I just ignored him, he'd go away. Did you tell him to stop contacting you? She hesitated, and that hesitation was another blow. Not directly, she admitted. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. So, you left the door open. That's what you're really saying. You didn't want him, but you didn't shut him out either. You kept him on standby, just in case. No, she cried, reaching for my arm, but I pulled away. It wasn't like that. I love you. I've always loved you. You just wanted to have options, I interrupted, my voice cutting through her words like a knife. You wanted to keep him close enough to feel wanted without losing what you had here. Her sobs filled the room, but they didn't move me. I was too far gone, buried under the weight of everything she hadn't said. I need you to believe me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I ended it. I chose you. I stared at her, the woman I had trusted, wondering how much of that trust had been misplaced from the very beginning. You didn't choose me, I said quietly. You only chose me because I found out. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw the full extent of her guilt. But guilt wasn't enough. It wouldn't erase the texts, the kiss, or the betrayal that had lodged itself like a splinter in my chest. I turned away, heading toward the stairs without another word. I needed space to think, to figure out whether there was anything left worth salvaging. As I climbed the steps, I heard her whisper something under her breath, but I didn't stop to ask what it was. I didn't care. Not right now. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure if I could ever believe her again. I spent the rest of the day in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling like it held some hidden message I couldn't quite decipher. The weight of her confession sat heavy on my chest, suffocating, relentless. I replayed every conversation we'd ever had about him. Every moment she had slipped away under the guise of something innocent. The betrayal wasn't just in the kiss. It was in the secrecy, the texts, the fact that she had let him live in her life like a shadow I wasn't supposed to see. And now that shadow had grown, swallowing everything I thought we had. By evening, I heard her footsteps approach the bedroom door. She knocked softly, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. Can we talk? Her voice called through the wood, fragile and trembling. I didn't answer, but the door creaked open anyway, and she stepped inside. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked like a woman on the edge of collapse, but I wasn't ready to catch her. She sat down on the floor across from me, her knees pulled to her chest. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the radiator. Then she broke the silence. I know I've destroyed everything, she whispered, but I'm begging you to let me fix it. You can't fix this, I said, my voice hollow. You think saying sorry will glue the pieces back together? It won't. The cracks will always be there. She wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll cut him off completely, block him, change my number if I have to. Just tell me what you need. I let her words hang in the air, knowing she was desperate, but unsure if her desperation was for me or to save herself from the consequences. You lied to me for months, I said finally. And you expect me to believe that you're suddenly capable of honesty now? I am, she insisted, her voice cracking. I'll prove it to you. I'll do anything you want. I shook my head, the weight of her promises pressing down on me like stones. You're only saying that because you got caught. If I hadn't seen that photo, you would have kept going, wouldn't you? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I swear, I was going to end it. I cut her off, my anger flaring again. You keep saying that, but I don't believe you. You didn't end it. I did by finding out, and if I hadn't, who knows how far it would have gone. She sobbed quietly, her hands covering her face as she rocked back and forth on the floor. I wanted to feel something, pity, forgiveness, anything, but all I felt was exhaustion. Then, as if fate wasn't done messing with me, her phone buzzed from the nightstand. We both turned to it, And in that split second, I saw her panic flare up again. She lunged for it, but I was faster. I grabbed the phone and unlocked it, my heart pounding as I opened the message. It was from him. "I know you're scared, but we don't have to hide anymore. Just say the word, and I'll be there." I stared at the words, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. I turned the phone around, shoving it in her face. "You told him it was over, huh? That's what you said, right?" She cried harder, her sobs echoing in the room. I didn't reply. "I didn't." "But you didn't block him either," I snapped. "He's still waiting for you, Julia. He still thinks you're going to leave me. And do you know why he thinks that? Because you left the door open." She collapsed onto the floor, her face buried in her arms, her body shaking uncontrollably. For a moment, I watched her, waiting to feel something: anger, satisfaction, closure. But none of it came. I just felt empty. I stood up, pacing the room as I tried to think. I could leave her. I had every reason to. But a small, nagging part of me wanted to know why. Not why she kissed him or why she lied, but why she kept holding on to him. What did he give her that I couldn't? I stopped pacing and sat back down on the bed, my voice calmer now, but no less serious. "Tell me the truth, Julia. Why him? Why didn't you block him after you told me you ended it?" She sniffled, wiping her face as she sat up, her back against the wall. "I don't know," she whispered. "I was scared. I thought, what if things between us didn't get better? What if you woke up one day and realized you didn't want me anymore? He was my safety net. He made me feel wanted, and I was selfish enough to keep him there just in case." Her words hit me like a hammer to the chest. This wasn't just about love or lust. It was about security, about fear, about her needing something I hadn't given her. But that didn't make it hurt any less. "So, you were waiting to see if I failed," I said bitterly. "And if I did, you'd have him ready to pick up the pieces." She shook her head, sobbing. "No, it wasn't like that. I love you. I never stopped loving you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions, and the truth was I didn't know what I felt anymore. Love, betrayal, anger. They were all tangled up, making it impossible to see clearly. I stood up, grabbing my jacket once again. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice panicked. "I need time," I said without looking back. "Don't follow me." As I walked out the door and into the cold night, I realized that the past wasn't just something Julia had dragged back into our lives. It was something that had its claws in both of us. The difference was she had opened the door willingly. Now it was up to me to decide whether I'd close it for good.